Well, it's time for another news article that I read to you. So get your chores ready to do. You can get a dusting rag, start dusting something, maybe get the vacuum cleaner out. Just put your headphones in, get some chores done while I read to you today. I'm Megan Fox with pjmedia.com. You can find my columns there every day. Today's column comes from the Los Angeles Times, and it is written by Meredith Blake and Mary McNamara. It's called And Just Like That Was a Train Wreck. Here's what made it unmissable anyway. After 10 episodes, dozens of brunches, several unannounced visits by Che Diaz, and a truly staggering number of ridiculous hats, And Just Like That has come to an end. And what a wild ride it has been. Literally so in the case of Big, who died after exerting himself on the peleton. From Carrie peeing in a bottle of iced tea to Harry's prosthetic penis, the show has given us all plenty of moments to talk about. Critics may not have been kind, but viewers have flocked to the series in droves, making it HBO Max's most watched original to date, whatever that means without actual numbers. I'm glad they pointed that out. HBO keeps saying that it's been the most watched series ever, but they're not releasing the actual numbers. And also keep in mind that HBO Max streaming service has only been around a very short time and they don't have many things on it. Like there's hardly anything on HBO Max right now. If new things, I mean, not like old movies. They have a ton of those. So original series though, not many. All right, moving on. Series creator Michael Patrick King and star Sarah Jessica Parker have told Variety that they're open to another season. The season finale, premiering Thursday, finds Carrie contemplating what to do with Big's ashes, then traveling to Paris to scatter them on the bridge where he rescued her during a terrible trip many years ago, and moving on with the hunky podcast producer who's been making eyes at her all season. Meanwhile, Miranda decides to bail on a high-profile internship to be with Che in LA while Che makes a pilot. What could possibly go wrong? And Charlotte throws Rock a they mitzvah for the ages. Where did And Just Like That go wrong? What made this bonkers revival so compulsively watchable? It was bonkers. That's a good way to put it. Bonkers. And just why do some of us care so damn much about these characters? I've been asking myself the same question. Why does this bother me so much? Well, I feel like I need therapy over it. Staff writer Meredith Blake and culture critic Mary McNamara share their theories here. Oh, you guys, I can't wait for you to hear this. It's so funny. Meredith Blake. Mary, as you know, I started out as a defender of this show. I thought the first few episodes, while messy, gave us plenty of promising new territory to explore. Grief, aging, the perils of being an affluent, straight white woman in a changing social environment. I loved the insanity of killing off Big via Peloton. I was excited for Carrie to be single and return to the dating world eventually. I didn't even mind the lack of Samantha. But most of all, I felt committed to these characters. I've spent more than half my life watching them on TV. It would take a lot more than the horror of watching Big masturbate. Ugh, sorry for the reminder. For me to abandon this show completely. Let's just say my loyalty has not been rewarded. Each week I eagerly tuned in, hoping things would get better. Oh, lady, all of us, that's all of us. That Miranda would come to her senses, that Carrie would pick an apartment already, that Steve would find his way around the farmer's market. And each week I would be disappointed. I found myself more and more frustrated with the underdeveloped characters, the incoherent storytelling, the wild tonal swings from scene to scene, the depictions of podcasting and stand-up comedy that bore no resemblance to either. If I hear the phrase comedy concert one more time, I will eat a VHS copy of Eddie Murphy Raw. This is so good. Storylines would be introduced only to vanish completely by the next episode. Miranda flew off to Cleveland to surprise Che, a gesture Miranda herself likened to something out of a romantic comedy and one that seemed destined for spectacular failure. Instead, the show skipped over the whole Cleveland thing completely, forgetting it, along with Miranda's drinking problem, Carrie's book, and whatever the heck was going on with Big's secretary. I couldn't help but wonder, were the writers of these episodes even talking to each other? And that brings me to the biggest problem of this season, Miranda. My God, what have they done to her? During the original run of Sex and the City, Miranda was a radical character. The prickly one with the sensible wardrobe who didn't buy into Charlotte's fairy tales or Carrie's gauzy fashion fantasies. The show wanted us to think of ourselves as Carries, but most of us were Mirandas at heart. I don't agree with that. I was definitely not a Miranda. Now Miranda is a blubbering, lovesick idiot. The problem is not that she left Steve or that she fell in love with a queer non-binary person, though I think these writers are underestimating the importance of finding someone to watch TV with. Thank you. Yes. Thank you. Okay, I hated that. I hated the fact that they made it seem like, watching television together with your loved one is somehow it spells disaster. It spells failure. No, it really doesn't. Moving on. It's that she's acting like a selfish twit, and the show wants us to sit back and shout, "Yes, queen," as she blows up her life. That was the most maddening part. You got the feeling that they really wanted you to root for Miranda, and all of us are like, Miranda sucks. Justice for Steve. If I learned one thing from The Hills, it's that you never turn down a coveted internship to go hang out at the beach with your new crush. It won't end well. All that being said, I couldn't wait to watch the screeners as soon as they landed in my inbox each week. For a show I didn't particularly like, and just like that, has consumed an inordinate amount of my mental energy for the last 2 months. Me too. Girl, me too. I've discussed it on social media with other moms at drop-off and in group chats with my friends who, like me, wondered why Charlotte's daughter had such trouble inserting a tampon and couldn't wait to see which of Carrie's exes would show up in a surprise twist. Sadly, none of them. And it wasn't as simple as hate watching, where a show is so viscerally awful it feels cathartic to dump on it collectively. It was more like King had taken us all hostage and we'd developed Stockholm Syndrome. At some point, it became clear that the audience cared more about these characters and certainly understood them better than their own creator did. Absolutely right on, girl. This is amazing. She's like speaking my language right now. Now that we're at the end of the season, I am hoping that this train wreck of a show gets renewed, if only because I cannot accept the idea that Miranda will spend eternity with Che Diaz. Clearly, I do not have a healthy relationship with this show. Me either. I've been totally traumatized. I have PTSD induced by this show, and I can't stop talking about it because it's so bad. Moving on. Mary, what do you think was the biggest problem with And Just Like That? Was it Miranda's brain transplant? The bizarre Peloton obsession? The way they did Steve so dirty? The clumsy attempt to atone for the extreme whiteness of the original series? Side note, I hate it when people say this. The show was not extremely white. It's racist to even say that. Like, it was in New York City. There were characters of all different races all the time. Just because the 4 main characters were white does not make it extremely white, and I'm sick and tired of hearing that. I'm sick of it. Anyway, the clumsy attempt to atone for this extreme whiteness of the original series by introducing 4 new characters of color who were mostly half-baked. Che Diaz? Mary McNamara says, at the moment, my biggest problem is the full-blown crisis of Che Diaz being in Los Angeles. I repeat, Che Diaz is in Los Angeles. Seriously, if King wants to sully the reputation of New York with his ridiculous antics, fine, but keep it the hell away from LA. Though I do feel like Che getting a pilot says a lot about King's feelings toward television at the moment, which is apparently that pretty much anything can get made, and Just Like That being a case in point. As you know, I don't know who these catty bitches are, but they are hilarious, and I love them. As you know, I'm on the record as hating the show from the get-go. For more than a few minutes, Carrie, Miranda, and Charlotte seemed less like older iterations of themselves than the 100-year-old resurrected witches of Hocus Pocus. Sister, what is this new magic called Instagram? As someone in the same age, if not income demographic as the characters, I kept watching in sheer horror. Were there any over 50 females writers on the staff? Did none of the over 50 female cast members protest being portrayed as complete and utter dimwits? Apparently not. I don't think I've ever felt a male gaze more than watching these women struggle in ways that belie the fact that they have been women alive on this planet and navigating a major urban center for half a century. I understand the king is trying to acknowledge the bubbles of privilege he put them in during Sex and the City, but Anne Just Like That feels less like a correction than a punishment, as if King were angry at them, not only for his mistakes, but for not being the young women of the original series. Oh, it's so profound, really. That really is. That is what it felt like. Like King hates these characters. When he had the nerve to put Charlotte in a freaking white coverall so her unexpected period had maximum shock value, I was forced to utter all the swears, none of which fit within the Times profanity guidelines. Though speaking of that episode, I did actually sympathize with the tampon trouble. I can say from experience that this can be an issue, especially when girls get their periods at 13 or 14 and want to go swimming, and who among us hasn't lost the string? But one resonant C-plot does not make up for all the other maddening absurdities, including the absolute lack of character granted either Lily or Rock, who were shamelessly used as props for Charlotte's journey. Though I did like what an absolute brat Rock was. Being non-binary does not give you a get-out-of-adolescence free card. Okay, I have to stop right there because she wasn't non-binary. It turns out that Rock was just a little asshole. Like she wasn't actually non-binary. She doesn't know what she is. She's 13 by her own admission. She doesn't know what she is. She's just being a bitch. Just stop being a little bitch and eat your peas is what she needed to hear more than once. Moving on. Che, alas, does not have that excuse. I did feel some tiny wicked satisfaction watching Che hijack the series from under Carrie's grieving yet resolutely stilettoed feet. Not even the sight of Carrie smoking outside in housecoat, rubber gloves, and a double babushka could top the screaming outrageousness of Che's woke button or many lectures on Che's rules of intimacy. But the price was way too high. At first, I honestly wondered if we were going into a Miranda has early onset Alzheimer's storyline. So unrecognizable was she with her crazy gray wig hat and weird manic racism. Then I thought, oh, maybe it's poor deaf Steve who's going to introduce a serious storyline about coping with medical issues. But no, this was just someone's vision of 50-somethings in a long-term marriage and or incredibly lazy writing to justify Miranda abruptly ending her marriage because she has a crush on a complete jerk. Honestly, when Che gave the "I can't give you anything conventional" speech, I couldn't help think how outraged Miranda's younger self would have been if it had come from a man. Which brings me back to my original horrified concern. If there's a second season, dear God, do not let any of it be in LA. I mean, can you imagine? All those terrible New York Times takes made into an actual narrative? The wittering about traffic in Lotus Land? It will keep us in defensive think pieces for a year. MB. Mary, that is truly terrifying to contemplate. Though as a New Yorker, I feel compelled to say that it feels like this show represents my city less than it ever did, especially post-COVID, when no one in their right mind wants to wear heels. And just like that, feels much less interested in New York than Sex and the City, which was about Carrie's love life and her ongoing relationship with Manhattan. It was right there in the title. That sense of place is mostly absent here. There were times, like when Carrie moved into that white void of an apartment with the most ridiculously fake waterfront view I've ever seen, when I wasn't even sure that this show was made on planet Earth, much less in New York. So true. In an attempt to atone for Sex and the City's sins of omission, and just like that introduced at least 4 major characters of color, but these characters were largely half-baked, with storylines so flimsy it was hard to feel invested in their outcome. Naya, you seem to have nice and good style, but I simply don't care about your marriage to whatever his name is. Also, why do you keep hanging out with Miranda? She's your student, and it's weird. Okay, as a side note, I have to say, one of my listeners pointed out in the comments section that we knew more about the side characters in Sex and the City than we do about these 4 new supposed main characters or additions. We knew more about the people whose backstories were told by the narration, by Carrie's narration, like Susan Sharon, and we knew more about them in 1 episode than we found out about any of these other characters in 10. And that is so true. I mean, it was such tokenism, and the fact that they don't see it is just sick. Meanwhile, moving on. Meanwhile, the new character who consumed the most screen time was also by far the least likable, Che Diaz. In addition to being the worst fictional comedian in the history of fictional comedians, Che is also the kind of boss who will show up at your apartment while you're recovering from surgery, get to third base with your best friend in the kitchen while you piss yourself in bed, then fire you with no notice because Che's going out to LA for a few weeks to make a pilot. But enough about Che. By the end of the finale, Carrie has moved on to a new romance with hot podcast producer. I suppose this is exciting, although I wish it had come about 5 episodes sooner and we could have had a show about a woman finding love after loss instead of whatever this was. Mary, is there anything positive you can say about the series? I will say that I liked the addition of Sarita Choudhury as Seema, though I wish we'd seen more of her. I was glad Steve was lucid long enough to give his sweet little speech about marriage, and only wish that Miranda had listened to it. And that drunken sex scene in Carrie's kitchen was, if nothing else, entertaining to watch. Oh no, I totally disagree. Not entertaining at all. I'm irping just thinking about it. It had some of the outrageous spark that animated so much of the original. No, I disagree. And Mary responds, I did like Seema, though not that so much of the story revolved around her finding the right guy. Choudhury is always a pleasure to watch, and Seema at least does not appear to have been in cold storage for the past 12 years. I liked the rabbi who shows up at the end, though not that she is continually identified as the trans rabbi. But I feel like we haven't talked about the finale as a finale, or even mentioned the excising of Chris Noth, leaving at least one flashback scene in tatters. Obviously, the main storyline of the series was Carrie getting over Big's death, something that was, if we're honest, far less traumatic than the fallout Peleton faced. Still, early episodes dealt effectively enough with the numbed shock of early grief, and I appreciated how, when her agent pushed back on her memoir, Carrie realized her actual life was not as marketable as her random musings on what Sex and the City all meant. Did we ever believe that she was an actual columnist? Not when she spent so much time typing while laying fetchingly across her bed on her stomach. I have to agree with that. If you write like that, you will get such a neck crick. You can't even believe it. Now, in her defense, I actually do write in bed a lot because sometimes I like to just, prop myself up against pillows. But you don't do it on your stomach or your neck will kill. You have to do it. I have like one of those things that you stick on your lap and you put the laptop on and you lean back against the pillows. So, yeah, the laying on her stomach thing was not believable. Moving on. The insistence that Carrie offers readers a glimmer of hope was, of course, also a clunky way to get her back on the dating scene because no one is interested in a woman who is not at least seeking love. The sexual assault accusations against Noth certainly distracted from any residual fondness nostalgia viewers might have had for Big, which left the writers in an unfortunate position of having a final moment, Carrie scattering Big's ashes that no one cared about. Actually, I disagree. Because allegations against someone does not make me suddenly hate all of their work before. I will even go so far as to say I believe Woody Allen is a child predator, and his movies are still funny. You know what I mean? His work is still funny. Now, that doesn't mean that anyway, regardless. I don't know about the allegations against Chris Noth. I don't know if they're true, and it did not make me think, oh, I never want to see him again. I actually think they should have kept him in the series. Allegations are not the same thing as convictions. Period. Moving on. But frankly, any pathos would have been hard to sustain once we got a look at the absurdly enormous orange dress Carrie wore to do the honors. I realize that part of Carrie's charm is her penchant for and ability to pull off the most outrageously inappropriate, if personally stylish, clothing ever. I'm still not over the fascinator at Big's funeral. But this enormous tangerine colored situation was over the top, even for her. I'm not even going to mention the Eiffel Tower handbag in which the ashes were stashed. Did she funnel them in herself at the hotel room? I mean, honestly, even in Paris, this dress would have stopped traffic and, in all likelihood, led to the gendarmerie informing Carrie that it is illegal to dump human remains into the Seine, which it is, of course, in case you were wondering. Between this scene and Emily in Paris, I believe Americans lost all right to call the French rude. It's funny. While it would have been hilarious to see her hauled off in handcuffs in that dress, I do feel bad for all the emotive work Parker put into that scene. But even as the camera caught her Nefertiti-inspired profile, it was all very anticlimactic. I did not feel bad, however, for my hoot of outraged laughter when suddenly Mr. Hot Podcast Producer was introduced as a last minute, please give us a second season love interest. I mean, Jeff Zucker just stepped down for having an affair with a coworker, for heaven's sake. But whatever, love is love, and I wish them well, Carrie and Hot Podcast Producer, as long as they promise to stay in New York and not follow Jay and Miranda to LA. And even if they do, I will watch every episode. God help me. I feel the same way. It's so true. So true. All right. Well, that was a great article. I loved almost all of it. Very little to disagree with there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll be back later with more. I have more columns. I found more things to read. So I'll be back with more reading to you, and I hope you're having a great day.